What's up, guys? What's going on? I'm Paul. This is Falling Theology's Daily Devotional, and we are going through the book of John. I hope that if you have been going through John, it has been helping you to grow in your faith and your love for Jesus, your trust in him, because he is infinitely good. And this has been a unique picture or study of who Jesus is as we've been diving deep into the scriptures. And if this is your first time, man, I'm glad you're here. And I hope that you find something interesting or powerful from us discussing who Jesus is from his own words. And it's a powerful thing to listen to the words of Jesus, even though all scripture, of course, are the words of God. But it is something kind of unique whenever we look and see what Jesus actually says, because it's kind of like how when Jesus speaks, it's always from the Father. But then he says, truly, truly, I say to you, where he's like, man, I want to point specifically or pay close attention to or think about what I'm about to say real hard. And so it's kind of like that with Jesus' words. So I hope that you guys are enjoying it as we're discussing these things. Today, we are going to be in John chapter 10, verse 11 through 13. If you haven't read it, go ahead, stop the tape, check it out, see what it has to say, come back, and we will answer the 4 questions. If you've already done that, let's go ahead and dive in. So what's going on? What's happening? The first question. And it's really what we're continuing on is Jesus' discourse or discussion. Really it's a monologue about the shepherd and the sheep. We saw he gave kind of like a illustration, and then he described or talked about some parts of that illustration that pertain to him. And in this instance, he goes on and says, I am the good shepherd. The last one was, I am the gate. And all of these are, I haven't spoken about in the last episode talking about it, but are these I am statements. And they kind of go with Isaiah scripture where God comes and he speaks to his people and talks about how he is I am. He is the I am. A lot of people think that these I am statements refer to um, God in the Exodus account with Moses at the burning bush, but that's actually not the truth. That most of these actually come from Isaiah, a passage where he is the suffering servant speaks, or God speaks of the suffering servant as well as himself saying who he is in relation to Israel. And so that's what Jesus is saying, is who he is in relation to his people. And the first one was the gate, which we talked about last episode. And now we're talking about being the good shepherd. And so what does it mean for him to be the good shepherd? Well, I think the good is not talking necessarily about being good as in like a good as in the idea of bad, good as bad, but really ideal is what it's saying, is that he is the ideal shepherd, or he is the shepherd par excellence is a big word, meaning like he is the greatest shepherd. He is the shepherd whom all should look to if they're wanting to be a shepherd. This is what shepherds would be. This is how it would be. And so I think that's what it means when he says good shepherd in this particular context. And so when he says, what does a true shepherd do? Well, he gives his life for the sheep. And then he discusses that in comparison with the worker or someone who is not actually the owner of the sheep. Remember, we talked about how shepherds in now, even today, but back then especially, were intimate, were close with, or cared for their sheep so much, especially since sometimes it was all they had, their livelihood, their food, their clothing, everything about it. And so when they wanted to make sure their sheep were taken care of, it was because it was a necessity. But in this way, it's actually Jesus is just talking about the relationship that he has with the sheep, that they're his own sheep. And we've seen that he cares so much about the sheep, so much so that he wants to give them pasture and rest and feeding and take care of them, provision. And so Jesus says that what a good shepherd does is lay down his life for the sheep. And that's what Jesus is going to do. Now, it's not that he wants to die specifically for the sheep, because that would not take care of the sheep. But what it is saying is that Jesus is willing, even though he does ultimately, because this foreshadows his death on the cross, but he is willing to give his life for the sheep. A lot of commentaries that I've read and studied through talk about this word huper in comparison to the sheep. And it says that is a for that means himself for these sheep, like as substitute or it's sacrificial language. Um, and so whenever he talks about his life in this way, it is foreshadowing to the cross where he actually exchanges his life for ours, giving us his righteousness and taking upon himself our sin. And then it compares it to, like I said, the worker whose sheep, they aren't his. And so when things come that could be difficult or hard, then the worker shrinks away. He doesn't stay and care for the sheep because they're not his sheep. And so it's a dichotomy, or not a dichotomy, a contrast between who Jesus is as compared to people that may be shepherding over us. And so what is this saying about God? Well, I think what it's saying here is that Jesus cares for us. We're his own. We are his. And he demonstrates that care by dying for us. I mean, he laid down his life for us on the cross. And so we can see him actually in real time giving himself for us, the love that he has for us by the actions and the deeds that he did. And so recognizing that Jesus laid down his life so that we might live that's definitely who God is. His love, his mercy, and his care for us. What about man? What does this show? Is that we are infinitely loved by Jesus. We should see that his care for us to lay down his life shows us the value and worth that we have. We are infinitely loved by Jesus. But also, I think we should think about what it means to be a worker of the sheep, that we should be taking on the characteristics of Jesus. It says that we should be like Jesus. It says in Ephesians, I believe it says that we should be acting like God, in the sense that we should be living out a life that brings glory to his name. And so for us to take a look at our lives and see, are we being like this worker where when danger comes, then we flee? Or are we being like Jesus, where we would give ourselves for God's people? And so that's the application, really, is contemplate first on the love of Jesus. Just sit and bask and wonder of the love that God has for us and of the value that he ascribes to us because of that. But then second, in our lives, man, what are we doing? Are we acting like hired servants, or are we acting like true shepherds? And I had to think about this a lot because it brings out the boldness that is necessary for me as I teach and preach and witness and live. Because when things get tough, am I just going to say, I'll let it slide? Because really that's running from the wolf and allowing the sheep to be scattered and devoured. Or am I standing up to the truth that needs to be spoken? Or am I standing firm in the love that I'm supposed to be giving? And so in the same way, I want to ask you that question. Hey, I appreciate you guys for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.